Hello there. And once again, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever the case may be. And now the game in the background is Rayman Forever on the PC. I bought it on GOG.com for $1.95, $1.99 or something, blah blah blah. Now, I originally had another topic I wanted to talk about today, but after seeing ReviewTechUSA's latest video this morning, I thought the opportunity to throw my opinion out here was too good to pass up. Now, I hope this doesn't get too long-winded, but this is a very nuanced topic, the niceties of which have to be elaborated on in a substantial enough length that will allow me to properly articulate my thoughts in such a way as not to sound like an idiot rambling on. So, if I may borrow a quote from Iwata, please understand. I would just like to say that no, console gaming is not dying, at least not in the foreseeable future. Consoles themselves are evolving, but this is a natural evolution that can be observed since consoles began to switch from cartridges to optical media, beginning with the CD-ROM, I think in around 1993, then later the DVD-ROM, and now Blu-ray, which the CD-ROM format allowed for playback of audio CDs, adding another function besides gaming, the DVD, playback of DVDs, and so on and so forth. You get it. So the fact that consoles are evolving to do more than play games, that's no front page news. It's been happening for the past 20 years. Although I believe now the question is, at least in the short term, which consoles will evolve to become more than a machine whose determining factor at the time of purchase is mostly to play video games. And that is not to say the machine would not see more usage as a device for the consumption of media other than the video games themselves, but rather that the purchase intent was overwhelmingly video game centric. For example, I played 6 to 8 hours of video games over the past week, and I watched maybe 10 to 12 hours of TV shows. Now, I didn't watch these shows on my Xbox, but for the sake of the example, let's say that I did watch it on my Xbox via Netflix. So the fact that my time on the console was spent using its secondary functions, actually being able to play video games on the machine, was why I decided to spend $400 on it back in 2006, instead of buying a cheaper Roku player later, or a $100 Netflix-enabled Blu-ray player, or even an $80 Wi-Fi dongle for my television so I could utilize its apps. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit away from the point of the video, that smartphones are certainly not going to kill consoles. And yes, I understand concepts like disruptive technology and the Rogers bell curve relating to the adoption of new technology. I've seen last year's GDC presentation by, I believe the guy's name was Ben Cousins, where he makes the case for mobile gaming killing the traditional console. And I think that is generally regarded as the best argument for mobile gaming eventually killing the console. So I think I have a pretty firm handle on the situation, and having been a consumer and observed the trends in the industry and the shifts that have occurred over the past 20 years, I think it's easy to look at these things retrospectively and group past occurrences into neat little categories that support a theory. But actually using that theory as a hypothesis to predict the future events of the industry is quite another thing entirely. And I think what we're likely to see is the mobile gaming market eclipsing the console market, perhaps not for a while in terms of total revenue, but in terms of the actual number of customers, and possibly in terms of revenue as far as the top 3 largest mobile game developers versus the top 3 largest console game developers. And the distinction here is that this does not signal the death of console gaming, but instead the emergence of a new market that exists alongside it. And I see consoles reaching out to mobile devices to include them in a supplementary role, to act more as enhancement rather than replacement with things like smart glass and Sony's upcoming streaming service. And to understand where I'm coming from, or where I'm going with this, you have to understand how people are using their devices. Not just smartphones, but also devices whose functions smartphones have either integrated or replaced. Smartphones have not yet been able to totally kill MP3 players, but let's forget about those for the purpose of this discussion, since MP3 players can cost as little as $15 and don't terribly compare well with consoles, and more expensive MP3 players like, say, the iPod, still being on the market, can be attributed to the fact that there's a sizable market for anything with an Apple logo on it. Two other devices that I do want to touch on, though, are camcorders and GPS devices. Smartphones have affected their sales, but to understand why they were able to do that, we have to think about how camcorders and GPS devices are used. Now, most people who owned a camcorder prior to the popularity of the smartphone used them for a few hours a year during a handful of times throughout the year, mostly during social events or holidays like birthdays, Christmases, parties, graduations. When the quality of video recording on smartphones rose along the curve, because this is how emerging technologies evolve, they evolve along the curve, it was such that the trade-off was negligible to the average consumer who only got a few hours of use annually from a similarly priced device, a dedicated device. Much of the same can be said for the GPS. Consumers who bought the GPS only used them for a handful of times per month when going on longer trips and vacations, and of course the consumers who actually used their GPS quite frequently and traveled a lot as a regular part of their lives, well, they'll stick with a dedicated GPS. And it only makes sense for the majority of those GPS consumers who only use those devices a few times a year or a few times a month to allow those devices to go ahead and be replaced by smartphones, which couldn't do the job as well, but instead well enough that the cost of a dedicated device became hard to justify against the amount of time spent using it. But now let's consider how the average consumer uses a game console. And according to NDP statistics, the core gamer spends about 18 hours a week playing video games. And that seems a little high to me, and I don't know actually what they're considering a core gamer. But I would say that the number would still be 12 to 18 hours regardless. And I believe this time spent is important, and it's going to be enough justification for actually spending $400 rather, or even $500 on a console over the upcoming generation, and even beyond that. And now let us consider another couple of examples where disruptive technologies have effectively killed other sectors of entertainment, and mainly arcades and movie theaters. And in the case of arcades, home consoles were the disruptive technology. And in the case of theaters, televisions were the disruptive technology. But to understand why arcades and theaters were killed, we have to again consider how people used those forms of entertainment. People could drive to a theater once a week, set aside a few hours of time, and pay for a show before the television became ubiquitous. I said ubiquitous. That means commonplace for children who happen to be listening. And people could visit an arcade once a week, or they could beg their parents for a change whenever they exited stores. I remember Walmart had several arcade machines, and I would always beg for change when I was a little kid so I could play the Ninja Turtles arcade game. And so yeah, you're essentially playing to pay per minute, almost, for gameplay that it was designed to be inherently shallow and then difficult to increase turnover at the machines. They wanted to make the games more difficult so that you would pop more money in. I mean, you would that increases the turnover and then the amount of money that the machine makes. Whereas with televisions and home consoles, consumers could make a one-time investment and enjoy their respective form of entertainment, whether they wanted whenever they wanted, rather, from home, within minutes, or on their own, and enjoy a deeper experience with modern games or weekly episodic television shows. And you may wonder how this compares to consoles versus a disruptive technology like the smartphone. And the difference lies in how little these things actually do compare. Consoles are right there in your home, connected to your 50-inch television in front of your comfortable couch or chair or recliner, and they aren't costing you additional money every time you want to play a game. The console experience has far fewer drawbacks, comparatively speaking, than did theaters versus televisions or arcades versus consoles, and thus I expect they will be significantly harder to replace. Now, I originally didn't include this in my talking points for this video, but I wanted to go ahead and take a moment to touch on the fact that smartphone tech moves almost too fast to establish a baseline for offering truly deep and well-crafted AAA experiences, at least in the immediate future. Now, I do expect this to change, though, as the progression of smartphone technology gradually begins to slow, although I still see it being more difficult to establish a good baseline for hardware, given that these devices are essentially built to last 2 years and then be replaced. And this is likely to change as well as the telecommunications industry, at least here in North America, moves away from the 2-year contract model, as one major carrier has already begun to do, T-Mobile. However, the Android platform, I feel, is far too fragmented right now to pose a serious threat to console gaming. It's spread across so much different hardware, running so many different versions, which wouldn't be a problem if the developers of mobile games were willing to offer the level of support of, say, a PC developer. But this, of course, is also subject to change as mobile app developers gain more market share, thus more resources to devote to support. But even so, hardware manufacturers and carriers still have to push updates to their customers, and everyone aside from Apple seems to be doing an utterly terrible job at that. And most of these things are likely to change, like I said, yet I still felt they were worth mentioning, and then these things are all hurdles that have to be overcome before smartphones can even be considered capable of offering experiences on par with consoles. And it goes well beyond the way that the game looks or the resolution that a game runs. And let's not forget just how large the console market is right now. We are approaching around 300 million machines sold across the 3 major platforms. And I figure that we're probably going to hit 300 million before the current generations of machines are done. And yes, profits are down and development studios are closing, but those profits are down from record highs in 2008 and 2009. And as Guns N' Roses pointed out, nothing lasts forever, even the cold November rain. So when an industry peaks, there's nowhere to go but down. You have the bandwagoners moving on, and things level out. Developers are closing and publishers are losing money because they made stupid business decisions, not because the market is drying up. And consoles are always going to be around, although I see them eventually evolving into dummy terminals that sit on your entertainment center and stream everything to your television. Even then, we'll still see machines from different manufacturers, I suspect, and there'll never be a unified platform. But that's another discussion for another day. The point is, Smartphones are certainly not going to kill consoles. Take some market share, sure, they're probably going to do that. Surpass console gaming's revenue, probably one day, but kill, hardly. I believe that's enough for now. That's enough for right now. I'm sure we'll speak again, probably on this very same topic. But now it's time to play some video games instead of just talking about them, so until we meet again.